Welcome back now for the news in detail. We begin from India, whose Supreme Court has ordered Narendra Modi's government to restore selective normalcy in occupied Kashmir. Hearing pleas against the revocation of Kashmir's special status, the court said India's national interest must take priority during the restoration process. Chief Justice Rajan Gogoi said he will visit the Jammu and Kashmir High Court to evaluate the situation on the ground. Meanwhile, former Chief Minister of Indian-occupied Kashmir Farooq Abdullah has been arrested under the controversial Public Safety Act. India's Home Ministry issued the detention orders for Abdullah hours before the Indian Supreme Court's hearing on the Kashmir crisis. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi said India stands divided after this court verdict. Talking to media, he said Indian top court's verdict aligns with Pakistan's stance on the Kashmir situation. He also says the European Parliament will discuss the occupied Kashmir issue tomorrow. Meanwhile, former Chief Minister of Indian-occupied Kashmir Farooq Abdullah has been arrested under the controversial Public Safety Act. Now, for more on this, we have with us Rebecca Banthan, Indus News correspondent from Mumbai. Thanks, Rebecca, for joining us. Rebecca, the Indian court said there should be normalcy, but selectively. So isn't that self-contradictory? Tell us more about it.
So what they're saying is the Supreme Court has said that normalcy does have to be restored in the region. They want to see schools opening, hospitals operating and life returning to normal, because since August the 5th there has been this lockdown. Obviously things have not been as normal, but there's been a blackout of communications. A number of people have been under house arrest, people have been detained, people have not been freely moving about, media coverage has not been freely facilitated, which has been a complaint of many media outlets. A lot of information just isn't freely moving around. So this has been a major concern since Kashmir's special status was revoked on August 5th by the Indian government. So the Supreme Court, now having heard these pleas, is saying that normalcy does have to be returned, but it's also recognising that this is an abnormal, exceptional set of circumstances, and that there is the issue of there's national interest, concerns about security, and so on. And that's why it's saying that although restrictions, it's implying, have to be eased, that can't necessarily all be done in one go. It's saying it has to be done on a selective basis, suggesting that perhaps things have to be monitored quite closely to see that the violence, any potential outbreaks of violence are minimised and so on. So I think that seems to be the issue here.
Right. Rebecca, also tell us, there are reports that the Chief Justice may visit Srinagar to know the realities on the ground, and the international media has already covered the dire on-ground situation in the occupied Kashmir. So will he be reviewing that also?
Well, it has been suggested that there might be a visit by the Chief Justice, and that's largely because there have been these complaints that the high courts of Jammu and Kashmir, that people perhaps aren't getting the access that they want. In particular, there was an activist that filed a plea that came up today, and that was an issue that highlighted. And the Supreme Court, has said that that's something it takes effectively. It's saying that it's something that it takes very seriously, and if it needs to do so, it would visit the region. It's also suggested that some of the cases should actually be heard locally. Like, for example, the editor of the Kashmir Times has complained that they're not being allowed to effectively, because of communication restrictions, movement restrictions, they're not being able to report properly on the matter in Kashmir. And that's one of the pleas, one of the petitions that came up. And in that case, the Supreme Court did suggest, well, is this a local issue, and is it something that should be heard by the Jammu and Kashmir High Court rather than the Supreme Court? But then obviously they need to make sure that those cases are being heard properly in the region, and now that's something that's definitely going to be looked into from what we've heard from what's come out of the Supreme Court today.
Well, thanks, Rebecca, for your time. Now, Indian troops have martyred 3 unarmed youths in occupied Kashmir amid the ongoing lockdown. Occupation forces martyred 2 youths during a cordon and search operation in Kathua district. The third youth was martyred in Jammu city. The Kashmiri media says the killing of 2 happened during an encounter staged by Indian security forces. It reported that Indian police in Jammu tortured the third martyr to death. Meanwhile, the Welfare Party of India says 40,000 Kashmiris have been arrested since August 5th, when India revoked the Indus Special status. Indian officials say 20 protests a day are being staged in occupied Kashmir since its illegal annexation by New Delhi on 5th August. The Indian officials revealed that Srinagar, Baramulla and Pulwama districts have been the focal points for angry public protests. The officials said more than 200 civilians have been injured by Indian occupation forces during the demonstrations. They said 92 Kashmiris have been shot and wounded in the last 2 weeks. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has demanded Indian government to stop gagging the people of Kashmir. In an online petition, Amnesty said the world needs to know what is happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir. Moving on, Iran's Revolutionary Guards have seized a vessel in the Persian Gulf for allegedly smuggling 250,000 litres of diesel to the United Arab Emirates. Iran's state media says the ship was detained near Iran's Greater Thumb Island. It says the crew has been handed over to authorities in the southern Hormuzgan province. Tensions between Iran and US allies in Middle East have spiked since Washington imposed economic sanctions on Tehran. In July, Britain seized an Iranian tanker near Gibraltar and alleged that it was carrying oil to Syria in violation of EU sanctions. In retaliation, Iran seized a British-flagged tanker in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran says it's ready to work for peace in Yemen with the United Nations and regional countries. Government spokesperson Ali Rabai says Tehran is willing to cooperate for stability in the region. Meanwhile, Yemen's Houthi rebels have said Saudi Aramco's oil processing plants are still a target and could be attacked at any moment. Houthi spokesperson Yahya Sarea said the Saudi-led coalition should stop its aggression in Yemen and lift its blockade. He warned foreigners to leave the kingdom's oil-producing areas to avoid becoming collateral damage in the next raid. Now, President Donald Trump says the U.S. is locked and loaded for a response to attacks on Saudi Arabia's oil facilities. He also authorized use of the U.S. emergency oil stockpile to ensure oil continues to flow after strikes closed 5% of global crude production. President Trump says there is reason to believe that the U.S. knows the perpetrators of the attack. Rather than retaliate immediately, the president says he wants to learn the identity of the attackers from Saudi Arabia. Trump rejected reports that he is still willing to meet Iran's President Hassan Rouhani unconditionally. Meanwhile, China calls it irresponsible to blame anyone for the attack without conclusive fact. Speaking in Beijing, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Hua Chunying appealed for calm and restraint. Now, for an in-depth analysis on this, we have with us Hamid Raza Ghulamzadeh, a political analyst from Tehran. Thank you, Hamid, for your time. So, Hamid, Trump has said the U.S. is locked and loaded. So, Hamid, is the Iranian government ready for a possible attack?
There is not going to be any war actually, but if there is, in case of any war and attack, yes, of course, Iran is ready. Iran has proved to be ready just a while ago when a spy drone of the United States intruded the Iranian airspace and it was downed by the defense system. And we know that it was a native one, so Iran is capable of defending itself, and it is very serious actually in defending its territorial integrity. So Iran doesn't seem to be worried about any intrusions or any wars or attacks. And I do believe that there is not going to be any. But in case of any war, yeah, Iran is prepared to defend it seriously and completely.
Right, Hamid, also tell us, what is the public mood in Iran after the United States President Donald Trump's latest statement about a possible attack on Iran?
No, Iranians are more making fun of him right now because they actually believe in the capability of the Iranian army and defense capabilities, and on the other hand, they have seen the recent events, and let's say they have a good historical memory. They have seen Iran fighting 8 years against the whole world, against Saddam, and they didn't actually give up, and they could win the war. And they have seen all the difficulties. They have been under so-called maximum pressure sanctions for 40 years. I personally remember for American presidents saying that they are imposing most crippling sanctions on Iran, and Iran is not crippled.
Right, Hamid Roza, thank you very much for your time. Now moving on. International oil prices have leapt by 8% after Saudi oil production was halved by drone strikes. Crude futures reached their highest level since May, but have steadied after the US said it would release strategic oil reserves. Driven by fears the US could attack Iran in response to the drone strikes, investors have piled into safe havens. They have lifted gold prices by nearly 1%, while silver has climbed almost 2%. In Ankara, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a bilateral meeting ahead of fifth round of Syrian talks. Earlier, Erdogan met President Iranian Hassan Rouhani during the meeting. The two leaders discussed regional peace. Erdogan is hosting Russian and Iranian presidents for their latest summit on Syria. The focus of this summit will be on Damascus's push on the last rebel-held bastion of Idlib. Primarily, Turkey is concerned by the steady advance of Syrian forces into the region, backed by Russian air power, despite a series of ceasefires. More news to come up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Two anti-establishment candidates have claimed victory with the unofficial results of Tunisia's presidential elections. The 61-year-old law professor Kais Said says he is in pole position. Abdel Fattah Moreau has come in a close second, while jailed media Mohol Nabil also claims he has qualified for the second round of voting. The Election Commission reported a relatively low turnout at 45%, down from 64% in 2014. Official results will be announced tomorrow. A runoff vote will be held in November if nobody secures an absolute majority. The death of President Beji Qaid Essebsi in July forced the elections to be held 3 months earlier than planned. Parliamentary elections are scheduled to take place in October. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he can strike a Brexit deal in the next few weeks. In an interview, Johnson expressed optimism that he could reach a final agreement before an EU summit on October 17th. The United Kingdom's Prime Minister reiterated his vow to take the UK out of the EU by October 31st with or without a deal. Johnson will meet European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker and EU's Brexit negotiator Michel Barnier today. The meeting in Luxembourg will see Johnson undertake his first Brexit negotiations since becoming Prime Minister in July. Ahead of talks, Johnson said the next few days will be key to his chances of securing an amended Brexit deal. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab also reiterated the UK's demand to remove the Irish backstop.
We've been very clear on the approach, and the Prime Minister will reaffirm those with Jean-Claude Juncker and Michel Barnier today, which is we want to remove the anti-democratic backstop. We've set forward a range of technical proposals how we would do that.
Raab also says the Prime Minister is going to build on the previous talks during his meetings with EU chiefs. Now moving on with the news stories. The Libyan government has accused Khalifa Haftar's eastern forces of killing dozens of civilians in the city of Tarhuna. In a statement, the government condemned what it calls crimes against the people of the city. It is demanding that the international community and the UN Security Council immediately work to stop such violations. Tahuna is 90 kilometers south of Tripoli and controlled by Khalifa Haftar's LNA forces. The fighting in Tahuna escalated after the GNA Air Force claimed it killed 3 senior LNA commanders in the airstrikes. Haftar's forces launched their renewed bid called Operation Dignity to capture the capital Tripoli last week. "36 people are feared drowned after a boat on the Congo River sank near the capital, Kinshasa. Police say 76 out of 102 passengers on board have been rescued. The whaleboat was traveling to Kinshasa from Mai-Ndombe province when it capsized 100 kilometers from the capital. Police say a rescue operation and investigation are still underway. Lake and river transport is widely used in Democratic Republic of Congo because of its poor highways. In the vast majority of accidents, passengers are not equipped with life jackets and many cannot swim. Now, more than 30,000 cyclists have taken part in a mass bike ride in Russia's capital, Moscow. The ride was organized in a bid to promote cycling in the city, which is home to more than 3 million cycles. This report has more.
On a warm autumn day, riders heading for the cycling festival arrived in the city centre early in the morning. Some came dressed in uniforms, brought instruments and took their children along. Muscovites have taken to the bicycle for a range of reasons, but for many it's a way of avoiding Moscow's notoriously tough traffic.
The weather is good, the spirits are high, so we decided to raise mood for everyone, ourselves included.
The event marks 8 years since the city's first cycling track was created. Cycling has become increasingly popular in Moscow as more protected bike lanes have been laid down in recent years.
Modern-day China is equipped with ingenuity from making a needle to construction of longest and highest bridges. On China's 70th anniversary, watch this report on how the superpower developed its road and bridge construction technology.
The longest, highest, and fastest built on the planet, unparalleled is perhaps the best word to describe the scale and ingenuity of China's bridge construction over the past 70 years. From Nanjing's double-decked road-rail Yangtze River Bridge and the world's widest multi-pylon cable-stayed Jiaxing Shaoxing Bridge to the newly operated Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge, China has connected once isolated cities and communities via the world's largest collection of bridges. 8 of the world's 10 highest bridges, including the tallest, the Beipon River Bridge, which is the height of a 200-story building, 6 of the world's 10 longest sea crossing bridges, including the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau, which is also the longest sea bridge in the world and designed to withstand a super typhoon, an 8.0 magnitude earthquake, or a strike by a 300,000-ton cargo vessel. 6 of the world's top 10 suspension bridges and 7 of the world's top 10 cable-stayed bridges. But the numbers alone mean little without taking into account the influence these structures have on people's lives. Take Chongqing as an example. Sprawling across the Yangtze and Jialing rivers, the mountain city in southwestern China was once near impenetrable. Steep slopes and broad rivers isolated the city from the rest of the country and limited local people's opportunities. Dating back to 1949, waiting 4 hours for a ferry to cross one of the rivers was not unusual in Chongqing. Everything changed, though, with the construction of the Chongqing-Yangtze River Bridge. 4 hours was cut to just a couple of minutes. Today, Chongqing is home to more than 4,000 bridges. Behind the stunning speed of construction is the Chinese people's fighting spirit. Chongqing people voluntarily participated in the construction of the Yangtze River Bridge in the 1980s. Without their dedication, the mountain city would never have become the bridge capital of China. Innovation is another important factor in China's infrastructure achievements. China's pier top spin construction approach in building the Datong Qinhuangdao line, for instance, heavily reduced costs and difficulties. And the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge is a model of innovation. The bridge's tunnel submerges into the water at a maximum depth of 50 meters and is connected by 33 pipelines with a total cross-section equal to the size of a tennis court. When confronted by mountains, one cuts a path through. When blocked by a river, one bridges to the other side. The wisdom in the old Chinese proverb exemplifies an approach which has helped drive China's shift from impoverishment to fast development over the past 70 years.
Britain's Trade Minister Liz Truss says striking a trade deal with New Zealand will be a priority for the UK after Brexit. Truss has arrived in Wellington for talks with her counterpart David Parker today. Truss's three-nation tour also includes Australia and Japan. It is aimed at preparing for trade negotiations after Brexit. Truss said the UK is ready to start working out the details of negotiations with New Zealand. She said signing an independent trade deal after leaving the bloc is vital for the United Kingdom.
European Union on the 31st of October, with or without a deal. And as part of that agenda, striking trade deals much more broadly than we have been doing is going to be vitally important. The UK is going to have its first independent trade policy for the first time in 45 years.
Around 50,000 workers have begun a strike at America's biggest car maker, General Motors. The United Auto Workers Union walked out after failing to reach an agreement over pay and conditions with the manufacturers. About 200 plant-level union leaders voted unanimously in favor of a strike. One of the biggest sticking points is GM's decision to close 4 car assembly plants in the US. This is the first major stoppage at GM since 2007. Most European stock markets have lost 0.5% or more in early trading. London's FTSE and DAX indices have declined significantly. Asia's financial markets have closed mixed amid the turmoil. The Hang Seng Index lost 1% after another weekend of unrest in Hong Kong. The Shanghai Composite was flat after China reported a further slowdown in industrial production and retail sales. Well, it's time for the weather updates now. With the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For more news and update, keep watching Indus News.